the brutal winter of 1887, on a frozen ridge high above the Laramie Mountains, 3 Comanche warriors who had lost everything to betrayal and bloodshed opened their door to a sound no one expected in the howling storm. The desperate braying of mules carrying 3 half-frozen white women. These men had sworn never to help the world that destroyed their families. Yet in that moment, fate forced them to choose between the hatred that kept them alive and a fragile chance at something greater. What they discovered strapped to those mules would drag old ghosts into the light and demand a price none of them were prepared to pay. This is a true frontier story of mercy, buried truth, and redemption that ends in a way that has left millions in tears. Stay until the end. You won't believe what happens when justice finally speaks. If this moves you, subscribe now. Share where you're watching from in the comments, and let's keep real stories like this alive together. The wind screamed down from the north like a living thing, driving needles of ice across the high plateau above the Laramie Mountains. It was December 1887, and winter had come early, hard, and without mercy. Snow lay 4 feet deep in the drifts, crusting over with a skin hard enough to bear a man's weight until it broke and dropped him waist-deep into the white dark. Pines groaned under their loads. Somewhere far below, wolves answered the storm with long, hungry howls. High on a sheltered ridge, 3 Comanche warriors kept their silence. Black Hawk, the eldest, sat outside the rough log cabin he had built with his own hands, sharpening a skinning knife against a whetstone. His face was carved deep by weather and grief, braids streaked with gray falling across a buffalo robe, pulled tight against the cold. Red Cloud, broad and quiet, fed split pine into the fire pit, sparks whipping away into the night. Little Wolf, youngest of the 3, stood watch on the rocks above, eyes scanning the white waste for movement that never came. They had come here 8 years earlier, after the massacre on the Washita Road. Women and children shot down by soldiers who claimed later it was a mistake. Papers signed, promises broken like thin ice under iron-shod hooves. The 3 men had buried their dead, then walked away from war, from reservations, from everything. Up here, there were no treaties, no agents, no blue-coated lies, only the mountain, the hunt, and the long quiet that kept the remnants of their people safe below. Black Hawk tested the blade with his thumb and nodded once. Red Cloud banked the fire low. Smoke rose thin and straight before the wind tore it apart. Little Wolf dropped down from the rocks, snow shedding from his leggings. None of them spoke. Words had grown scarce over the years, used only when meat was taken or danger sighted. Silence had become their shield. Inside the cabin, a single tallow candle burned on a stump table. Shelves held jerked venison, coffee traded from a Mormon freight outfit, a few cartridges for the old Henry rifle leaning in the corner. A medicine bundle hung above the door. Eagle feathers stirred whenever the wind found a crack. On the wall, faint charcoal lines marked the passing seasons. 8 tallies now, each one a winter survived. The storm worsened after dark. Snow hissed against the logs. The door rattled in its leather hinges. Red Cloud added more wood, flames leaping high enough to throw shadows across the scarred faces of men who had once ridden painted and fearless into cavalry fire. Little Wolf sat cross-legged, mending a rawhide rope, fingers moving sure and fast. Black Hawk stared into the fire, seeing things the others no longer asked about. Far below, trails to the white settlement of Red Hollow had vanished weeks ago under the drifts. Word had drifted up on the last trading trip. Fever sweeping the town, children burning hot, doctors helpless. The Comanche heard it the way they heard distant thunder, something happening in another world. They had no reason to care. White men had chosen their road long ago. The price had been paid in blood that wasn't theirs to forgive. Yet the ridge felt colder than any winter before. Black Hawk rose once to check the horses picketed in the cedar brake, 2 tough Mustangs and 3 mules tough as stone. They stood head to tail, coats rimed white, patient under the onslaught. He spoke low to them in the old tongue, breath fogging, then returned to the fire. Midnight came and went. The wind shifted, driving snow harder against the east wall. Red cloud banked the coals for morning. Little Wolf rolled into his robes. Black Hawk took the first watch, sitting just inside the door, with the Henry across his knees. Outside, the world had gone white and soundless except for the endless howl. Then, thin beneath the storm's roar, something else reached him. A faint, broken sound, almost lost. He leaned forward, listening hard. It came again. The weak, desperate bray of a mule carrying too much weight through snow too deep. Black Hawk's hand tightened on the rifle. Red cloud stirred in his sleep. Little Wolf was already on his feet, knife in hand. The sound grew closer, carried on the wind like a warning. 3 voices now, faint and failing. Black Hawk stood, pulled the door bar, and cracked it open against the blast. Snow poured in, stinging his face. He squinted into the swirling dark, seeing nothing at first, only white chaos and the black trunks of pines bending low. Then shapes moved out of the storm. 3 mules staggering forward, roped together, heads down, legs trembling with exhaustion. And on their backs, slumped forms wrapped in frozen cloth, human forms, barely alive. Black Hawk did not hesitate. He stepped out into the teeth of the gale and seized the lead rope. The gale slammed the door back against the wall as Black Hawk hauled the lead mule inside, snow exploding across the dirt floor in a blinding cloud. Red Cloud and Little Wolf were already there, knives drawn, but the sight stopped them cold. 3 women, half frozen, lashed to the saddles with rawhide that had cut deep into their wrists. One hung limp, head down, another clung to the mane with blue fingers. The third, older, gray hair escaping a torn bonnet, still gripped the rope that tied the animals together. Black Hawk cut the women free with quick slashes, while Red Cloud dragged the mules deeper into the cabin, their hooves scraping loudly on the planks. Little Wolf slammed the door shut and dropped the heavy bar, shutting out the storm's roar to a muffled howl. Heat from the rebuilt fire hit the newcomers like a slap. Ice cracked and fell from coats and eyelashes as the women sagged to the floor. Black Hawk threw buffalo robes over them without a word, then poured hot coffee laced with jerked venison broth into tin cups shoved into numb hands. The older woman, Eleanor Grant, coughed hard, steam rising from her lips as she forced the liquid down. Her eyes, sharp despite the exhaustion, moved across the 3 warriors, taking in the rifles, the medicine bundle, the silent readiness. "We ain't here to cause trouble," she rasped, voice raw from cold. "Judge Harlan sent us. Said if we made the ridge alive, you'd understand." Red Cloud's jaw tightened at the name. Little Wolf glanced at Black Hawk, waiting for the elder's lead. Hours passed before the women could speak without shivering. The mules stood in the corner, steam rising from their coats as Little Wolf rubbed them down with gunny sacks. Eleanor finally sat upright, pulling the robe tighter. She told it plain. Fever had hit Red Hollow like a scourge, burning through the children fastest. The territorial doctor was dead, supplies cut off by the storm. Judge Harlan, passing through on circuit, had brought medicine and sealed papers from Cheyenne, but a fall broke his leg 2 days back. He knew men would be watched, stopped, maybe killed for what they carried, so he put it on 3 women no one would suspect. Abigail and Clara Hayes, sisters pale as the snow outside, nodded confirmation when Eleanor paused. Clara, the younger, whispered, "He said Comanche would know the worth of truth." Black Hawk's eyes narrowed. He had heard white men speak pretty words before. Red Cloud turned away to poke the fire harder than needed, sparks flying up the chimney like angry stars. When the mules were cool enough, Little Wolf untied the canvas packs, stiff with ice. He worked the frozen knots loose with a knife heated in the flames, then laid the bundles before the fire. The first opened to glass vials packed in sawdust, fever medicine, quinine, laudanum, labels neat in black ink. The second held more of the same, but the third, wrapped in oiled leather, contained a thick sheaf of papers stamped with the territorial seal and a leather-bound journal still warm from the mule's flank. Eleanor watched Black Hawk lift the journal, his scarred fingers careful on the cover. "That's what they'll kill for," she said quietly. Proof of the Washita Road massacre in '79, names, orders, signatures buried till now. Red Cloud froze mid-motion. Little Wolf's hand drifted to his knife. Black Hawk opened the journal slowly, firelight flickering across pages filled with tight handwriting. Dates, places, sworn statements. The last entries, ink smudged by melting snow, were in Judge Harlan's failing script. Storm too fast, leg shattered, mules the only chance. Final line. If law fails, let conscience carry it. Silence fell heavy as the snow outside. The fire popped. A mule stamped once. Black Hawk closed the book and stared into the flames, seeing ghosts rise in the heat. Women running, children falling, soldiers firing into dust and screams. Red Cloud's breathing grew harsh. Little Wolf's knuckles whitened on his knife hilt. Eleanor spoke again, softer. "Medicines for the young ones dying tonight. Papers are for tomorrow, if there is one." She met Black Hawk's gaze without flinching. "Judge said the people who lost most would know what truth costs." Outside, the wind kept screaming, but inside the cabin, the real storm had just begun. Dawn crept gray and slow over the ridge. The storm's rage dulled to a steady moan as snow kept falling in thick, silent sheets. Black Hawk sat motionless by the dying fire, the leather journal open on his knees, pages turned back to Judge Harlan's last words, again and again. Red Cloud paced the narrow floor like a caged puma, shoulder muscles bunching under his wool shirt. Little Wolf stood at the door, slit, watching the white world beyond for any sign of pursuit, none of them yet named. Eleanor slept fitfully under the robes with the Hayes sisters, their breathing finally even after the long night. The mules dozed in the corner, flanks still steaming. Black Hawk closed the journal at last and laid it beside the sealed papers, then looked up at the others. No one needed to speak the question hanging in the smoke-heavy air. The choice had already begun carving itself into their bones. Red Cloud stopped pacing and crouched close to the fire, voice low and edged. "We keep the medicine. Send the women down alone when the trail opens. Papers burn tonight." He poked the coals hard, sending sparks up. Little Wolf turned from the door, eyes troubled. Children die either way if the storm holds. But those names on the pages, they're the men who gave the order on Washita Road. Black Hawk said nothing yet, only stared at the flames, as if answers hid there. The argument stretched through the cold morning, words spare and sharp as skinning knives. Red Cloud argued for the old way. Let white men choke on their own poison. Keep Comanche hands clean of their messes. Little Wolf remembered his mother's voice in the dark before the soldiers came, telling him vengeance feeds on the living and leaves them hollow. Black Hawk listened, weighing each word against the weight of 8 silent winters. Outside, the snow eased enough to see the twisted pines 50 yards down the slope. Tracks from the mule's arrival were already gone, filled smooth. Eleanor woke then, coughing once, before sitting up stiffly. Judge Harlan knew what he was asking, she said quietly, meeting Black Hawk's gaze. Said if any men still carried honor after what was done, they'd see the job through. Red Cloud snorted, but said nothing. The words landed anyway. By midday, the wind dropped further, leaving a heavy quiet, broken only by dripping ice from the eaves. Black Hawk rose at last, walked to the door, and pulled it open. Cold air rushed in, clean and knife-sharp. He studied the valley far below, hidden under cloud and snow, then turned back inside. "We take everything down," he said, voice flat but final. "Medicine first, truth second. Both or neither." Red Cloud's eyes flashed anger, then resignation. Little Wolf nodded once, relief plain. They worked fast after that, repacking vials and fresh sawdust, wrapping papers tight against wet, dividing loads so no single mule carried too much. The women drank more broth and pulled on borrowed coats thick with bear grease. Black Hawk handed Eleanor the journal. "You read the trail signs better than we thought," she said. "But from here, we lead." She took it without argument. Little Wolf saddled the mules, while Red Cloud checked rifles and ammunition, loading the Henry and 2 old Spencer carbines. Snowshoes were lashed to packs. Pemmican and jerky were divided into saddlebags. The women watched in silence, understanding this was no longer their journey alone. When all stood ready by the door, Black Hawk looked at each face, Comanche and white alike, and spoke once more. "We ride back trails only ponies know. If soldiers or ranch guns come, we scatter them." They stepped out into the muffled world just after noon, mules blowing steam, snow crust breaking under moccasins and hooves. Black Hawk took the lead rope, setting a steady pace down a hidden draw that dropped sharply toward the valley. Behind him, the cabin door swung shut on its hinges, fire inside already cooling. Hey, if this story of hard choices in a harder land is hitting you the way it hits me every time I tell it, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button right now. These old frontier truths don't spread themselves, and I reckon we all need more like this. The descent grew steeper, forcing them single file along a ledge no wider than a wagon tongue. Wind returned in gusts, whipping powder snow into their faces. Halfway down the first ridge, Little Wolf froze and raised a fist, tracks crossing theirs, fresh enough to show horse iron. Black Hawk studied them, then pointed upslope. Riders coming fast from the north, cutting signs like they knew exactly what trail to hunt. Red Cloud's lips pulled back in a grim line. "Crow," he said, naming the old sheriff whose signature sat plain on those buried orders. The chase had already started. The riders appeared first, as black specks against the white slope, 6 of them fanning out with rifles already up, horses laboring through the crust. Black Hawk saw them from the lead and hissed a warning. The group kicked into motion down the narrow draw, mules lunging forward as snow sprayed from their hooves. Gunshots cracked behind them, flat and sharp in the cold air, bullets whining past rock and pine like angry hornets. Red Cloud twisted in the saddle and fired the Henry once, lever working fast for a second shot that kicked snow from a rider's hat. The pursuers split, 3 swinging wide to cut the angle while Silas Crow, face red under a frost-rimmed beard, drove straight down the center, shouting orders lost in the wind. Little Wolf guided the women lower, keeping them between the mules for cover. Eleanor clung tight to the mane, face grim. The trail dropped into a steep chute choked with deadfall, forcing single file again. Black Hawk led hard, choosing speed over caution. A mule stumbled, regained footing with a desperate scramble. Behind, the chase closed fast. Crow's men knew these mountains from years of hunting Comanche and runaway stock. Another volley splintered bark inches from Red Cloud's head. He returned fire without looking, buying seconds. They burst from the chute onto a frozen creek bed, ice groaning under the weight, but holding. Black Hawk angled south toward a tangle of cottonwoods where the bank rose sheer. If they reached it, the high ground might slow the horses. Crow saw the move and spurred harder, closing to 200 yards. A bullet took the lead mule in the neck. The animal screamed and went down hard, legs folding, packs bursting open across the ice. Vials shattered in the snow, papers scattering like white birds on white ground. The second mule reared against the rope, dragging the fallen one until Little Wolf slashed it free. Red Cloud leaped down, shoulder bleeding now from a graze he hadn't mentioned, and grabbed what he could, half the medicine, most of the papers, shoving them into saddlebags while bullets chipped ice around his boots. Black Hawk covered him with steady shots from the Spencer, dropping one horse that rolled screaming and pinned its rider. The women scrambled behind rocks as Clara cried out once, hit in the arm, but not badly. Crow roared with fury and pushed forward, men dismounting to advance on foot. The Comanche had seconds left before being pinned. Little Wolf made the call first. "Leave the papers, take the medicine, and the women! Run!" He hauled Clara up behind him, while Eleanor mounted double with Abigail. Black Hawk hesitated one heartbeat, eyes on the scattered documents, already half buried by drifting snow, then nodded sharply. They kicked the remaining mules into a gallop along the creek, leaving the dead animal and the truth bleeding out behind. Crow's men reached the wreck fast, rifles trained on the fleeing group, but holding fire as distance grew. Red Cloud rode last, blood soaking his sleeve, face carved from stone. They climbed a side ravine thick with spruce, branches whipping faces raw, until the pursuit faded behind terrain and trees. Hours later, they stopped in a shallow overhang, mules blowing hard, steam rising thick in the failing light. Red Cloud slid down and tied off his arm with rawhide, while Little Wolf checked the packs. Less than half the medicine remained. The papers were gone, lost under snow that would hide them until spring thaw, if ever found. Eleanor pressed a cloth to Clara's wound, voice steady. "We still got enough to save some young ones, but the cost showed plain on every face." Night fell early in the ravine, cold sinking deep as the fire stayed small to avoid smoke. Black Hawk sat apart, staring down trail, where ghosts now walked freer than before. Red Cloud spoke low across the flames. "We turned our backs on it. Truth dies tonight. Same as always." Little Wolf said nothing, only fed the fire one stick at a time. Wind picked up again, moaning through the spruce like a warning. Somewhere far back, Crow would be gathering what they'd left, proof enough to burn or bury deeper. The medicine might reach Red Hollow, but the names, the orders, the blood debt, all vanished under white silence. For the first time in 8 winters, the ridge felt farther away than ever. Dawn broke thin and iron gray over the ravine, light filtering through spruce boughs heavy with fresh snow. Black Hawk stood first, breath pluming as he stared back up the trail where the scattered papers lay buried. Red Cloud bound his wound tighter with a strip of blanket. Little Wolf checked the mules without a word. The medicine they still carried felt heavier than lead in the saddlebags. Black Hawk walked up slope alone, moccasins silent on the crust, until he reached the creek bed from the day before. Wind had drifted snow deep, but dark patches showed where blood and glass had stained the ice. He dug with gloved hands, then with his knife, pulling out sodden pages one by one, some torn, ink running, but enough whole to damn the men who signed them. He stuffed them inside his coat, face unreadable. When he returned, Red Cloud met his eyes and nodded once. No questions asked. Little Wolf tightened cinches while the women mounted stiffly, Clara's arms slung across her chest. Black Hawk divided the recovered papers between two packs, wrapping them in oiled cloth against the melt. "Crow thinks it's finished," he said low. "We show him differently." They left the ravine by a goat trail cut into the cliff face, narrow and treacherous, wind scouring loose snow into the void below. Black Hawk led again, testing each step. The mules followed steadily, ears flat against the drop. Halfway across, hoofbeats echoed from the ravine mouth, Crow's men picking up the cold trail. Shots cracked, bullets sparking off rock overhead, but distance and height kept them safe for now. Red Cloud waited at a bend, rifle ready. When the first rider rounded into view, he fired twice, once to kill the horse, once to wing the man. The animal screamed and crashed sideways, blocking the narrow path with its thrashing legs in snow. The others milled behind, cursing loud enough to carry on the wind. Little Wolf loosed an arrow that buried in a saddle. The message was clear: come closer and die. The delay bought hours. They pushed hard down the far side, switching to a dry wash that twisted south toward Red Hollow. Snow thinned lower, giving way to sage and frozen mud. By late afternoon, the town appeared below, a cluster of raw lumber buildings huddled against the plain, smoke rising thin from chimneys under quarantine flags. They skirted the main road, coming in from the east through cottonwoods along the creek. Guards at the edge saw the women first and lowered rifles, shouting for the doctor. Black Hawk handed over the saddlebags of medicine without dismounting. Vials clinked as they passed to eager hands. A gray-haired physician pushed through the crowd, eyes widening at the labels. "Enough here to turn the tide," he muttered, already turning away. Eleanor slid down and spoke quickly to the doctor about Clara's wound, then looked back at the Comanche. Townsfolk gathered, faces gaunt from weeks of fever watch. Children peered from doorways, cheeks flushed, but alive because doses had started that night. No cheers rose, only quiet thanks and averted eyes that knew what else rode in with the mules. 2 days later, the storm broke for good, sky clearing to hard winter blue. Black Hawk stood outside the livery, while Red Cloud traded jerky for grain. A crowd gathered in the street before the courthouse, men in store coats, women with shawls pulled tight. The territorial marshal, newly arrived from Cheyenne, read the recovered papers aloud, voice carrying clear in the cold air. Names rang out. Silas Crow heading the list, orders plain for the massacre on Washita Road. Witnesses who had long been silenced now stepped forward, spurred by the evidence. Crow tried to bolt from the saloon, but found rifles waiting. His men scattered or surrendered quietly. The town listened in heavy silence, boots shuffling on frozen boardwalks, no one meeting another's gaze. Black Hawk watched from the shadows as the marshal cuffed Crow and led him away. Red Cloud joined him, shoulder bandaged properly now. Little Wolf brought the mules around with light packs for the ride home. Eleanor approached last, bonnet in her hands. "You gave us more than medicine," she said. "Reckon some debts start getting paid today." Black Hawk nodded once. Words weren't needed. They rode out at dusk, 2 mules instead of 3, heading north into the darkening plains. Behind them, Red Hollow settled into an uneasy quiet, children breathing easier, truth finally spoken, justice slow but moving. Ahead lay the ridge, the cabin, the long winters again. But something had shifted deep as bedrock. Black Hawk glanced back once as lights winked on in the town. The wind carried no howls tonight, only the steady crunch of hooves on snow. Truth had been delivered, not buried, and the mountain felt a little less heavy on their backs. The snow has settled on the Laramie Ridge once more, and 3 Comanche warriors ride back into the quiet they once guarded with bitterness. They carried medicine that saved lives, and truth that finally forced a town to face its ghosts. No vengeance taken, yet justice delivered all the same. What would you have done in their place? Turn away and let old wounds stay buried, or risk everything to drag the past into the light? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. Thanks for staying with this story to the end. It means a lot. If it moved you, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that mercy can still win on the frontier. See you in the next one, partner. Stay warm out there.